I don't know if you've heard of Ram Dass. He was very famous in America, and he went to India, and he always said, like, well, what makes someone the richest country in the world anyways? So America might have the most amount of capital, but they're spiritually bankrupt. And he would say that India might have less capital, but they were spiritually rich. And I guess I would say the same answer back to you about Cambodia, where maybe they don't have all of the same capital resources or what we would define as, advanced, but spiritually they have a lot to offer, and they haven't completely lost touch with where they came from. That being said, one difference between Cambodia and India would be they went through the genocide and a lot of their wisdom keepers were lost. So I think it's more important than ever that people come from all walks of life that can help them reestablish their wisdom keepers, their ancient medicine. I work with plant medicine, which back in the day would have been called something like Soma in India or in Southeast Asia, except the medicine I work with, or a lot of the plants, come from South America instead. But you can probably find similar compounds in some plants here. If someone chooses to study the plant species here better. I personally do not have a background in in agrobiology or something like this. So basically, I started on this journey just curious about energy and about magic and spirituality, and how do you kind of self-heal. You hear about all of these stories and these shallow monks from China and people levitating. You're like, well, what's real, what's not real? And the only way to kind of, I guess, discern the information is to go down the rabbit hole, like in Alice in Wonderland. For me, I found someone to work with here, and I was trained for 3 years working with plant medicine from South America. There's 2 aspects to the plants I work with. One is the vine, and the vine does something where it doesn't allow your body to break down natural chemicals that it already has in the system. And from there, like, you take another plant that kind of amplifies the same chemical that's in your body, and it starts to create like a psychedelic experience where your brain starts to rewire itself. It allows for more, there's this thing called myelin, and it's like kind of like highways to your neurons. So let's say on an everyday basis we have 20 of them. When you ingest certain plant medicines or psychedelics, this can increase to 100 or more. You're kind of grouping more and more neurons together, so you get that feeling of the oneness. And from there, that sensation of being one with the universe, one with God, you let go a lot of that ego defense mechanism of trying to be individualistic and protect yourself. You take off your armor. And when you take off your armor, you can start to see like your own role, your own responsibility in the world around you, including your own life. And from there, like, you don't feel so helpless, right? Most of us feel really victimized and like there's no hope, there's nothing we can do. And we kind of just stay in the same loop of the same thoughts, of the same things happening to us, the same fractal patterns. But when you start to work with a shaman in plant medicine, this can start to, this boundary you've created for yourself that are limiting, they can start to dissolve and allow you to expand outwards and really start to understand your own self-awareness, your own willpower. And that's the gift I think medicines, like plant medicines, do. So it's not that it heals you in one night, but it starts to give you tools to realize you don't need to be so defensive, or you don't have to have trust for yourself, or you overdoubt yourself. You can start to redefine your value system and live by them. It's just easier because your brain's kind of working with you after so many years of when we've like kind of programmed it or conditioned it to be in this helpless victimization pattern. You start to dissolve that. You let go of that narrative, and life transforms. I feel like I am an ambassador to plant medicine. I don't know exactly what called me to follow through on it. I was always curious about alternative medicines, ancient wisdom, things like this. I grew up like in a very strict Catholic background, like in house and family and all that stuff. So I was a little bit of the black sheep of my family, really exploring these unknown territories. I always tell people, like, before there was plant medicine, I was really into tarot cards. So initially what I did here was I took the knowledge I had from tarot and I was reading at the local market here, the Banging Kong market. And from there, like, my reputation kind of grew, so people would trust to work with me in this more intimate, vulnerable setting of plant medicines. So I think it's just this openness and this curiosity, and I don't know, my playful aspect really likes to play and just see, and I don't have to take it so serious and strict, but I just let it flow through me, and it's like this creative power that comes from exploring and mastering, you know, these lost arts. I for sure have a past life to Cambodia, as you say, like spiritually connected. I was living in Siem Reap, I don't know in what lifetime, but I've done a lot of work here. In this life, I didn't choose Cambodia, Cambodia chose me, I like to say, because as a Peace Corps volunteer, you don't choose where you get placed. You just kind of go in for a bunch of interviews saying where your skill set is, and then they find the country that matches you best or where there's openings. So yeah, it wasn't really a choice. I like the aspect where there's this merging of Buddhism and Hinduism in like one, because like the way I always tell people about any sort of mythology or religion, and I mean, of course, I mean this in no offensive way for those that are more strictly following their own religious path, but for me it's more free flow, spiritual. It's like an open-ended question where it's all like these energy signatures that are coming through, and when you work with something as many gods like as there is in Hinduism, you're getting a lot more keys on the piano to play music with, you know, where maybe in Christianity there aren't as much keys on the piano board. And same when you then merge that with Buddhism, and you know, with Buddhism you don't just have one sect of Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism alone has so many thousands of like deities and sub-deities and demons that protect. And you're just getting, as you get to understand the energy or the frequency and the vibration behind these myths and behind these legends, you can start to play with them. You know, you can call them, you can invoke them. It just gives you a broader language set to work with in the context of spirituality and mysticism. Well, like, I'm not against Western medicine by any context. I think there's a place for both, and you know, I think Western medicine is needed in some contexts. But shamanic healing or shamanic medicine, you're working with more energy. And with that, like, you're kind of going in and you're taking more accountability. So it's always like as above, so below, inside, outside. So it's this mirror reflection. So you're kind of starting to face your own shadows, your own beingness, your own things, and stop projecting outwards. Like, instead of saying, oh, it's my colleague, that's the problem, it's my partner, that's the problem, you start to think like, okay, why do I keep seeing these same fractal patterns? And it's not to hate yourself or judge yourself or put yourself down, but it's to really accept and give love to the fact like, oh, this is where I'm at on my journey, and this is why I keep seeing these same sort of behaviors or shadows in others, because that's what I'm holding on to. So the way I think shamanic healing works really well is we start to get a picture of the cosmic map, you know, the churning of the Milky Sea or something like this, and we know where we are in it. And once you start to know where you are in it, it's easier to identify yourself. It's easier to call yourself back home. And it gives you this sense of wholeness, this holistic aspect of yourself that might feel like it's missing, but it's just within reach. And that's what I think shamanic healing does that Western medicine can't do. People are always really surprised. So this is something that I obviously have to deal with. Like, as you guys can all see, I'm Caucasian skinned. I'm from America. I don't come from an indigenous tribe. I'm not a 5th generational healer of shaman. So their idea of me is kind of at first like, maybe it's a gimmick, it's something like entertainment wise, like what can this girl really do anyways? And then also there's this weird aspect where it's like, while I can honor like Cambodian tradition and Indian tradition and American traditions in like the mythology and all of this, like essentially I'm weaving together my own system that works for me to call in energy. So they're used to things being one way, like a very traditional Cambodian way here, for example, and I'm introducing new concepts and ideas, which they have in some contexts. It's just me being able to verbalize them or teach them or pass them on for tools for them to use. Like that's where things get kind of more interesting when they work with me, is like they're getting more keys on the piano. I'm making everyone pause that works with me, like to understand their own processing system. So example, like A on the keyboard for me isn't A on the keyboard for you. And you have to figure out when you hit A on your keyboard, what does that do? I don't make assumptions that we're all the same. I think there's so many layers to each of us and where we originate from that it changes how we invoke energy or how we heal ourselves. And I do my best to take the knowledge and wisdom I've been granted through my work and then try to help you find your own methodology, your own framework. Well, that's going to be about your value system and your authentic self and your, what I call like your life purpose or your soul's mission, sort of a thing. So example, let's say you can use me as an example. Maybe I'm not the most financially wealthy person, you know, on the planet Earth or something like this, but I'm serving my soul's mission. So I'm very clear in myself. So it brings about a peacefulness in my consciousness. So essentially, if you're feeling a lot of discord in yourself about what you're doing, it might be because you're not honoring your value system, honoring your integrity and what it is you came to Earth to do. So then I would just sit back and, you know, have the person start to really explore and become more self-aware. Well, what is it that they wanted to do, you know? And sometimes it's just, it's an illusion that they're not happy because they feel they're not doing enough for humanity. But at the same time, right, not everyone can quit the financing sector and, you know, quit their jobs and become a shaman. That's not the answer either, right? It's just more or less like, what would be that person's ability to create effective altruism versus just like this feeling of I want to do good, but no way to measure what is their way of doing the best for humanity. And I think that's a lot of what people are struggling with, because in any profession you go to, if I ask you, why did you get into your profession? Why do you do what you do? It would be something about helping. Some people it's more about helping their family. Some it's more about helping humanity. Some it's about helping, you know, the environment. But essentially it comes down to something of like, we want to serve. We want to be of service. We just don't always know how to be of service. So I think when you start to explore this idea of service and like effective service and altruism, you can kind of get an idea of with the skill set you have now, with the money you have now, with the job you have now, instead of just leaving it all, right, which isn't always effective, how do you work within that, you know, within the structure you've created, within the life experience you built for yourself. So I'm not like a monk, right? So I wear flip-flops almost everywhere I go. But sometimes when I go to sacred sites, like even if it's like I haven't gone up to the shrine part of the mountain, but it's the mountain itself, and I like didn't take off my shoes or my flip-flops or whatever, sometimes they've just broken on me because the universe or the gods or whatever, like you need to walk barefoot. And the reason why it's important to walk barefoot in specific like high energy places, there's like energy grids and vortexes on Earth. And a lot of times when they do research of like where ancient temples like, you know, Angkor Wat is built or something like this, they're on ley lines, and it's like a very powerful energy. It just, I don't know, it just more powerful than other parts of the world or other spaces on Earth. Anyways, with that, like when we're like releasing from our body like energy that is discord or needs to be like, you know, go back into source, into God, essentially death is Earth will take it. But a lot of times when we're wearing shoes and things, like that blocks the energy from going back to Earth, to Mother Earth. And it kind of gets like stuck in lower parts of our body. So they always say like it's good for grounding and things like this to walk barefoot. I think they even have done studies where they make what they call like grounding mats, which is supposed to be like mimicking what Earth's energy does. And children with autism and stuff, when they put them on these mats, it really calms them down. So there's something to it. I mean, I know there's probably more scientific research needed. without it sounding too hooey or just, spiritual nature, but there is something about the energy in our body's response to putting our feet on the ground, touching earth, things like this. It does something to calm us, bring us peace, ground us. Yeah, that was really crazy. Like, I don't know, it just felt like some sort of message from him, I guess. So on all my...
Could you explain?
Yeah, sure. So my dad passed away of, he had failing heart condition for a long time, basically. So he had a lot of medical conditions. And then he passed away. And then because of COVID, we couldn't really get back to the States at that point. But like, I want to say it was like a month later, after we did like some more of our own like grieving here and our own ceremonies in our own way here for him. I was living in like a traditional Khmer wooden house, and I don't know those that are watching it. It's on stilts. It's very like so it's high up for flooding. It's pretty open, like it's not really closed windows, so it's very much like just a traditional wooden house. And it was like a month to the day after he died, I think it was, and a whole swarm of bees went into my son's room. Into like he had like a cabinet thing. And it was like not like just a little bit, but like a swarm of them. And it just felt like it was my dad blessing me, because the thing is that if you believe in animal totems or spirit animals, bees are like bringing nectar. They bring a lot of really good things. In Hinduism, right, Vishnu was a bee, correct? Yeah. So there's things like this where honey and the buzzing of the bee mimics like what happens when something vibrates in the brain to create like blissful experiences. A lot of the saints, right? There was a female saint that like in ecstasy could cry honey. So something about bees and honey really are about blessing and ecstasy and really enjoying and being alive. And as my dad passed, I felt like he was kind of telling us in that moment, like, enjoy life, live, don't, live for death. I want to be able to have people legally access plant medicine. Like, this is obviously one thing where, depending what state you go to, what country you go to, the ability to access plant medicines legally is not yet there. And I want to be able to have more people trained, not just as shamans, but also like facilitators. And there's so many different professionals that we need when it comes to the work with plant medicine, psychedelic therapy, things like this. And I would like to see it become more legalized, and I'd like to be able to help pilot that and find best practices, because if you watch various documentaries, you're going to see something at some point about something like peyote, which is sacred in like Native American culture, and they don't want it to be appropriated. And we want to be mindful of that too. So it's like, how do we sustainably harvest and use plant medicine in a way that we don't become too much about ownership or trying to sell it for profit or letting pharmaceutical companies control the whole game, but on an individual level, people are able to access it and start their healing journey in a way that's going to help them, help their family, help society, culture, humanity, so forth and so on. It's like, how do we do that respectfully and sustainably? And I want to be a part of that, whatever that looks like. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm doing my best to be less fearful, about coming out about my own work. Even this interview is a step in that direction, because I really do believe in the work I'm doing and the work that a lot of other people are doing with plant medicines and psychedelic assisted therapy. And just in my own small practice in Cambodia, I've seen how much people have grown. I've seen people that have had severe PTSD from like Khmer Rouge, like survivors, things like this, and they work with the plant medicine, and so much changes for them, so much opens up. And I don't want that to be, stifled or not available to them, because this is like something that's really, I guess, to me a bit sad, is like, as America legalizes state by state something like ketamine, psilocybin, cannabis, and eventually they say, I think something by like 2026, more will be legalized. The federal government doesn't, and as the federal government doesn't, then the UN still follows like basically federal laws in America. So developing countries like Cambodia don't have even the political willpower to decide on their own terms, we're going to start legalizing this because it'd be economic sanctions, and that's really difficult. So whatever role I'm playing in trying to make this an easier transition for places like Cambodia to be a part of the larger dialogue and the policy making, I'll do my best. But it's not me alone, and there's going to be teams of people behind me and support. And I mean, I feel I'm getting that from local people in Cambodia, and so I'm excited about where it's going to go. But I know it's got to be very strategic, not rushed, organic, because it's not to scare people in power that there's you want to do something that's to mess anything up or destabilize things. Instead, I want it to be seen as no, this is an amplifier, something that's going to strengthen governance, strengthen spirituality, strengthen culture versus explode it. Because obviously you go back to the 1960s when it was the first round of this sort of stuff. It was considered the counterculture, but it doesn't have to, I think we've all, or a large part of the human consciousness has moved past this need of the counterculture to wanting to amplify and help support systems that exist now. Well, it's a good question, because recently I've been really exploring what's the difference between happiness and pleasure, and which one is it that we're seeking, because I think a lot of us think that we're seeking happiness, but actually it's pleasure. And okay, so what does that do energy-wise? So happiness might be like serotonin, and pleasure would be dopamine. And within these two things, you can really create bliss. You need both of these in balance and harmony to create bliss, to create joy, to create life itself. To be able to manifest or start to write in what it is we want for the future, you need to be in the right space, the right container of these two things. Because otherwise, like we said, the loop happens. And the loop is when you lack serotonin, when you lack these chemical responses in your brain, your body can't comprehend frequencies. It can't comprehend external things going through the world to process, so you can start to make clear decisions on what you want next. I think they've done studies in, The Body Keeps Score. I forget who wrote it, but it's a very famous book. And they say people with severe depression and PTSD, if you put a key in their, you blindfold them and you put a key in their hand, they don't know what the object is because they have no ability to sense or feel somatically in their body. So, happiness, pleasure, things like this life vitality allows us to clearly comprehend what's going on around us, the frequencies, and then start to write in the future that we want. Palm, I know a little bit about it. For me, I always joke that maybe this is why I ended up my profession, where I have what are called Similian lines. They go all the way across and all the way across. So on one hand of the population, only 10% of people have this. It is really rare to have on both hands. But I went to India and I asked them about it, and they're like, well, they didn't really know so much what to tell me. But tarot cards, it's a lot of Jungian, because there are people that actually use tarot therapy, or there's a lot of counselors kind of mixing and matching now. More and more people are concerned about, Mercury retrograde, astrology, as they go into traditional Western therapy offices or psychology offices. And what happens is that they're asking me a question, and then I'm laying out the cards. They call them a spread in tarot. And the cards and the pictures are telling me a story, and then I'm relaying back that story so that they kind of can start to open up, because in ancient times, before there was writing systems, people would sit around a fire and tell stories, right? And use pictures. And it's something within maybe our reptilian brain, I don't know, that allows us to come to more of a calm, peaceful state when we're reading tarot or hearing someone read tarot for us, that gives us the answers that we already know inside of us. It's just kind of helping weave out what we sort of understand. And sometimes even let's say I tell you something in that session and you're like, no, it's not true, which is going to happen from time to time, right? Because not everyone's ready to hear these stories, these narratives. But usually what happens is they'll go back, and a few months later they'll come back to me and be like, I really sat with what you said, and yeah, it really makes sense now. Thank you, you know. So it's not about fortune telling in that like I'm predicting the future way. It's just me trying to pull out energy cords and make stories for you and narrate what it is that you're struggling with, or what's blocking you from receiving or going forward with the question you're kind of asking me. And of course, the traditional questions are love, career, money, family, this sorts of things. And it's the human condition to have to struggle with these things, I guess, to an extent, suffer a bit, because in suffering brings compassion.